Congressman Hurd's office.
No claps for that, you know. I'll give you a clap right here. Yeah.
And was inspired to pursue a career in public service. Here at UChicago, he has been involved in the IOP's Bridging the Divide program and our Leaders of Color Leadership Development program. He has also interned in DC and in Texas over the summer. Please join me in welcoming him to the podium.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's event. At a time when our national discourse is marred by partisan extremes, discord, and divide, I'm here to introduce a statesman who has managed to rise above the fray and emerge as a leading voice for civility and moderation in our national politics. It is truly my distinct pleasure to introduce Congressman Will Hurd, who is a fellow Texan and proudly represents the 23rd Congressional District in the Lone Star State. From collecting intelligence vital to our national security as an undercover CIA officer, to serving 3 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives, Congressman Hurd truly understands the meaning of sacrifice and service. During his time in Congress, he has served on the House Permanent Select Committee for Intelligence, where he serves as the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Intelligence, Modernization, and Readiness. Representing the nation's largest border district, which spans 820 miles and is larger than 22 states, Congressman Hurd has been able to offer a pragmatic take on the border and immigration. Congressman Hurd understands the importance of the U.S.-Mexico border and has been a tireless advocate for border communities like mine. A recipient of Allegheny College's 2018 Prize for Civility in Public Life, Congressman Hurd has shown that it is possible to disagree without being disagreeable. His commitment to bipartisanship may be best symbolized in his now high-profile 25-hour road trip from Texas to Washington, D.C. with then fellow Representative Beto O'Rourke. A true patriot, public servant, and proud Aggie, Congressman Hurd's career is one to be admired by many. Tonight's conversation will be moderated by McKay Coppins, who serves as staff writer for The Atlantic, where he reports on national politics and the presidency. Last winter, he was a visiting Pritzker Fellow here at the Institute of Politics. Now, please join me in welcoming McKay Coppins and Congressman Will Hurd.
He's hired.
That was a long audition for a staff position. I think he aced it, although unfortunately you're leaving Congress. I actually wanted to start with that. Thank you, by the way, for being here, and thanks to the Institute of Politics for having us. So when you announced I think it was beginning of August, that you were retiring, you were leaving Congress, you said, I wrote it down here, that one of the things you wanted to do was to help grow a Republican Party that looks like America. I think a lot of people across the political spectrum will look at the Republican Party today and see that that is an uphill battle. Right?
There's only one black Republican. In
You're an example of that, right?
Yeah, and the Senate, yeah.
And you're leaving. So let's start with the big question. Is that really possible in the coming years, in the next few years? Is it possible to change what the Republican Party looks like, and how do you do it?
So yes, it can change. And also I want to say, what's up, Chicago? All right. Y'all are way more interested than Harvard was when I did that at Harvard. Just for the record. Look, it's great to be here and to cover some of these issues. And the answer is yes. We can change the way the Republican Party looks and acts. I think it's important. We need to have, not just Republicans should care about that, but independents and Democrats as well, because we need 2 strong parties to have a competition of ideas. The only way big things have ever gotten done is in a bipartisan way. Unfortunately, we can call it a decade. We have seen a lot of times where you can only get things done in a unified government. And then what happens? That unified government only lasts for 2 years, and the next group comes in and spends their next 2 years trying to overturn those things that were done under unified government. And so that is a problem. And I think you can fix it. And people say, well, if you want to make the Republican Party look like the rest of the country, then you need to stay in. I told someone earlier today, in the last 2 weeks, I've had conversations with 12 African Americans that are running as Republicans in congressional districts around the country, and a majority of them are ones that are likely to be the actual Republican nominee. I think when the slate of candidates are set for this year, I think we're going to have the highest number of women running, women candidates in the Republican Party. So it takes time, right? And part of it is, how have I been successful? I represent a 71% Latino district that Hillary Clinton won in 2016 by 3 points, right? And then in 2018, Beto, when he ran against Ted Cruz, won the district by 5 points, right? The way I've continued to be successful is that I take a message to places that have never heard a conservative message. And I often tell a story about a town called Eagle Pass. Eagle Pass is on the border, 85% Latino, 87% Democrat. And when I was first running, I went down to a tardeada. A tardeada is an afternoon party. And it was at a ranch where the translation basically meant the ranch that spits blood and doesn't flake, right? And I show up, and there's about 700 people at this party. I'm literally the only Republican. There was a band, and some local elected officials were in the band. They stopped playing because they're like, why is Hurd here? And I had 212 people come up to me, and I know that number 212 because the person with me, I told them to count, that asked me a version of this question: why are you here? And what I call the professional political class, the people that run races, the people that do polling, they should say, well, you're in a room with a bunch of Latinos, they're probably Catholic, you should talk about the conservative things that Catholics care about. No. Okay, my answer to that question of why are you here was, I like to drink beer and eat barbecue too. And then the second time I showed up, people would actually come and shake my hand. Third time I showed up, people would whisper, I'm a Republican, right? Fourth time I showed up, people would tell me a problem. Fifth time I was there, I would say, hey, remember that problem you talked about? I was able to solve it. And so ultimately, that's why my numbers electorally has increased from cycle to cycle, when the total number of population of people voting has increased in that particular area, because I show up and engage and talk about issues folks care about. So we've proven over the last 3 cycles that you can take a conservative message to places that doesn't necessarily resonate, and it's important for us to solve some of these generational facing challenges we're dealing with.
So what you just described is, I think, the model for what a lot of Republicans who have the same project as you, that's what they talk about, right? They say, we need to go into communities that we haven't been in for a long time. We have to take the case there, right? And you're not the first one to talk about this. I remember in the wake of the 2012 presidential election, after Mitt Romney lost to President Obama, the Republican National Committee commissioned this report. They called it the autopsy, remember? And that was supposed to look at why the Republican Party was losing, what they had to do to win. And you can go read it, it's online. But a lot of we have to take our message to minority communities. We have to do better reaching out to women. We have to moderate our tone on immigration.
Yeah.
So 4 years later,
we did the exact opposite.
The Republican Party did the exact opposite and won by the skin of their teeth, and in 2016 won the presidency, right? And so the message that a lot of Republicans are taking from 2016 is that politics is all about coalition building. The coalition that we have to win is doubling down on white working class voters, not spending, sharpening our tone on immigration, if anything. How do you move the Republican Party away from that consensus that's starting to build in the Trump era?
So I think, the autopsy, I've literally reread it 3 or 4 months ago. It is still germane today. And the principles and theories are still germane. And anybody who's using 2016 as a barometer for anything in 2019 is crazy because the environment has completely changed, right? And things are moving at a pace that we haven't seen electorally before. And so I disagree with the notion that you win elections by driving out the base.
Yeah.
Now, is that happening? Yes. Do most people subscribe to it? Yes. I don't agree with it. I actually believe the way you really win is by appealing to the people that agree with 80% of what you're talking about. Crisscrossing a district, so I have 29 counties, 2 time zones, as Rodrigo said, 820 miles of the border. It takes 10 and a half hours to drive from one corner of my district to the other corner at 80 miles an hour, which is the speed limit in most of the district. My district director found out 2 weekends ago it's not the speed limit in all of the district, right? And it's a let's call it a 50-50 district. Way more unites us than divides us, right? And if we talk about those issues, you get rewarded. Now, I'm unfortunately in a district that are only like 40 in the rest of the country, right? That are truly a toss-up in November, where most of the seats are decided in a primary, both Republican and Democrat. And so when most seats are decided in a primary, you're talking to literally 1.5% to 2% of the population of that district. That's why you have the crystallization of the edges, right? Now, it's hard. Right? It's hard to be out. Yes, Republicans always say you got to go out and talk to people. Well, you got to keep doing it. Right. It's something you have to do all the time. I've done close to 3,000 public events in a district as large as mine, and that resonates with people. And so if you're going to sit on your butt in Washington, D.C. and not go back in your district, and you're not going to talk to people, then it's a problem. Oh, and by the way, you can't talk to them 90 days before the election. Yeah. That's called pandering. Right? You have to talk to them, all the time. And so it's not easy, it's hard, but I truly believe if we're going to solve some of these problems that we're facing in this country right now, then we have to sort this issue out. And ultimately, I think voters need to demand it. I was on a panel at South by Southwest a couple of years with the digital director of The Rock, right, Dwayne Johnson. And this was right when the movie Moana was about to come out, the cartoon. And she goes, if Moana fails at the box office, are we going to blame moviegoers, or are we going to say it was a crummy movie? You're going to say it's a crummy movie if it doesn't perform well. Politics is the only time when we actually blame voters, instead of saying that the voters weren't given a product or a service that they're interested in coming out to get, right? And so yes, too many people have won elections by appealing to their base when we should be doing it a different way.
To what extent, you earlier this year when President Trump tweeted a bunch of incendiary things about the so-called squad for congresswomen of color, said that they needed to be sent back to where they came from. 3 of them were born in America. All of them are American citizens. You were one of the rare Republicans who came out and said those tweets were racist. Those comments were racist. To what extent is your project made more difficult by having the leader of your party
by somebody saying racist things?
Saying racist things all the time.
It makes it harder. It makes it hard. Look, I have a pretty simple philosophy. Agree when you agree, disagree when you disagree. I did this under President Obama. I've done this under our current president. And I can't tell you how many times I've been told, go back to Africa. I'm not from Africa. I've never been to Africa. I don't have any people in Africa, right? And when you say something like that, what you are literally saying is, you are not like me, you are therefore inferior, and it doesn't matter, we don't care about who you are, right? That's the exact opposite of what we should be doing ultimately as a party. And so it's I'm going to always speak up when you see some of those things. And we've had that problem before. Earlier in the year, there was a representative that said some crazy things. I forget exactly what he said, but he got pulled. Kevin McCarthy, the leader of the Republican House, pulled his committee assignments as punishment for saying crazy stuff like that. It's 2019. There's no room in this country for racism, homophobia, Islamophobia, any of that stuff. And, I've seen it myself. My dad's black, my mom's white. They moved to San Antonio, Texas in 1971. It was not in vogue to be an interracial couple in 1971 in South Texas. The term interracial didn't actually exist, right? Nobody said that.
Probably a less artful term.
Yeah, exactly. And my parents live in the house today that was the only house that they could buy in San Antonio, right? My mom would go look at the house, and then she's like, I gotta wait till my husband comes home. My dad would show up there, that sold earlier today, right? And then my dad was a traveling salesman, and there was some, in 1970s in Texas, he wasn't able to eat at every restaurant. He wasn't able to stay at every hotel, right? And now their youngest son is a member of Congress, right? Which is pretty crazy to me, and we've come a long way, and we still have a long way to go.
I want to talk about Texas in a second, but how did your experience growing up and hearing the stories that your parents went through, everything they experienced, how does that shape your politics? Because, I mean, you're the only black Republican in the House. There are not a lot of black office holders in the Republican Party, period. How did it lead you to the Republican Party as opposed to toward the Democratic Party or toward liberal politics like so many other African Americans in this country?
Sure. My dad grew up my dad's 86 years old, and he grew up in a town called Marshall, Texas. Marshall, Texas, in the Civil War, was the second most important city in the Confederacy at the time. When Jefferson Davis saw the handwriting on the wall, he was going to move the Confederate capital from Richmond to Marshall, right? And so when the Civil War was over and we won, Marshall became a place where it was one of the centers of Reconstruction in Texas. And so you had a lot of Republicans there. The second historically black college and university was built in Marshall, Texas. This was the environment that my father's father and grandfather grew up in and was influenced. It was also the place where you had the first white primary, which was the forerunners to Jim Crow, right? And so the first Jim Crow law happened in Marshall, Texas, right? And that was at the time done by people that were considered Democrats, right? So that's kind of the backstory of my father and that side of the coin. And then, you hear his lessons. My mom and dad started when my dad retired for being a traveling salesman, him and my mom opened a beauty supply, right? And so if anybody needs their hair and scalp analyzed, I still remember a few things. And seeing them start a small business from scratch in order to make sure their kids can go to school. Then I went to Texas A&M University, and one of the first people I met was George W. Bush. At the time, he was governor. Then you had Bob Gates, was the interim head of the Bush School there before he became president of A&M, before he became Secretary of Defense. And then when I was Colin Powell was the Secretary of State when I was in the CIA. So when I look at the people that influenced me, a lot of them had conservative leanings, right? And so that's why I am where I am today. And I actually believe, the principles and theories are things that are timeless. It's unfortunate that there are some who have taken those principles and theories and made it harder for those of us that want to talk about them.
When you announced your retirement, I can't remember if you were the third or fourth Republican But now, as of October 1st, and maybe there's been even more since then, six Republicans, House Republicans from Texas have announced they're not going to be running in 2020. That's a quarter of the state's Republican delegation to the House. What's going on in Texas? There's a lot of talk about how this is a signal of this political realignment happening in Texas, that Texas could be in play in a way that it never has been before. Do you believe that, and what do you think is happening that's causing all these retirements?
So I've made it very clear, Texas is a purple state. Just because we don't have a statewide elected Democrat doesn't mean Texas is not purple. And so that trend exists and is there. I think that is separate from the number of retirements, right? I don't think those two are necessarily connected. When everybody has their own opinion. The Texas delegation, Republican delegation, is incredibly senior, and many of them have been there for a couple of decades, right? And so at a certain point, you're going to start seeing some of those changes. And when you look at, I think that's half of the members that are leaving, right? I also believe that these being in Congress is not something you're supposed to do for 30 years, right? It's something you should go in and serve and then get out, right? So everybody has a different opinion of why they're leaving. But let's talk about this trend that is happening. 2016, in Congress, Republicans in Congress, in the House, only one got under 55% of the vote. Yours truly, right? In 2018, 2 losses and 10 got under 55% of the vote. Why does 55% of the vote matter? It's in essence, I think that's when you have a district that's a jump ball.
Yeah.
Right? And then at the State House, those numbers are ultimately even worse. And then when you go to who's turning out, you don't have registration in Texas. You base people's registration on which primary they voted in. So people that voted in 4 of the last 4 Republican primaries, 3 of the last 4, and 2 of the last 4. These are hardcore Republican voters. In 2018, the highest turnout ever. Yet Ted Cruz only won by 2.6%, right? Our lieutenant governor, who is literally the most powerful elected official in Texas, only got 51% of the vote. Why? It's that minorities, people under the age of 29, and women in the suburbs are the 3 largest growing groups of voters in Texas and across the country, and you're seeing them being a larger, a disproportionate large size. So go back to the autopsy that we talked about. Guess what 3 groups of people the autopsy said you should be talking to? Minorities, women under the age of 29, and women in the suburbs, right? And so that's the reality. And so what has changed since 2018 to curtail that trend? And I would say not too much.
We have a number of students here, and I want to make sure that we spend a little bit of time before I ask you about some of the news items of the past few weeks, which we will get to. But I want to, there are a number of people here who are thinking about their futures, thinking about their careers in public service or politics. Tell me what led you to decide to enter the CIA?
Sure. When I was a sophomore in high school, I got an internship at the Southwest Research Institute. It's the largest private research entity in the United States of America. And I was involved in a robotics program. What my sophomore, Will Hurd, whose only technical capability was to type at 75 words a minute, was contributing to robotics, I do not know, and I don't remember. But that caused me to be interested in computer science. I had my mentor was a woman named Dr. Jill Marshall, who I was like, I want to be just like her. And I studied computer science in high school, and then that was my degree in college. I'm walking across campus, it's my freshman year, and I had never really been outside of Texas up to that point in time, and I see a sign that says, take 2 journalism classes in Mexico City for $425. I had $450 in my bank account, so I go to Mexico. I fell in love being in another culture. I thought it was cool seeing things I only read about in books, and I added international studies as a minor.
Not journalism?
Not journalism. But the first class I took in international studies, we had a guest lecturer who was a former CIA tough guy. Right? This guy told the most amazing stories, and I'm like, wow. And I did something I had not done up to that point in my college career. I went and knocked on his door, right? It's like, tell me more. And so that began my interest in the agency. And so I applied, and I got accepted. And so I thought it was going to be awesome to live in exotic, crazy places and serve my country, right? And so I was a case officer, so I was the dude in the back alleys at 4 o'clock in the morning collecting intelligence on threats to the homeland, right? I was the guy recruiting spies and stealing secrets. It was our jobs to prevent terrorists like Al-Qaeda from blowing up another facility. It was my job to prevent Russians from stealing our secrets. It was my job to put nuclear weapons proliferators out of business. Best job on the planet, right? I did 2 years at what I used to call our super secret CIA training facility called The Farm. Now it's on Google Maps. I wish that was a joke, it's a true story. 2 years in India, 2 years in Pakistan, 2 years in New York City doing interagency work, and then 1.5 years in Afghanistan, where I manage all of our undercover operations, right? And I manage a lot of officers. And you know who my best officers were? Anybody want to guess? Not, I don't think I had anybody from the University of Chicago, so I can't say that was necessarily it. Women, the female case officers, right? And I tell that because there's probably a lot of young women here that may not think about a career in intelligence, because all you hear about is James Bond, right? But Jennifer Bond is way cooler, right? I had an officer, her call sign was Babaloo. Babaloo is a Dari word. She was about 5 feet tall, blonde hair, squeaky voice. Babaloo is a Dari word, and the best translation is probably boogeyman, right? and Babaloo got a bomb larger than the Oklahoma City bomb off the streets of Kabul. I had another female officer that dismantled a entity that was making suicide vests, right? It was a great career, great service to be able to do it in exciting environments, work on the most important issues of the day. And in addition to collecting intelligence, I had to brief members of Congress. And I was pretty shocked by the caliber of our elected officials. And my mama said, you're either part of the problem or part of the solution. And so I left a job I was good at because I got pissed with the things that I was seeing from members of Congress.
What do you mean by that?
Look, I'll give us a quick story. A bomb goes off, I'm in Kabul, a bomb goes off in front of our embassy, takes out a section of our wall, kills some of our local guards, 4 o'clock in the morning, and my unit was responsible for trying to figure out what happened. We conduct a couple dozen operations in a very short period of time, and we had a HPSI CODEL, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, congressional delegation, out in Kabul. I go into the briefing, and I hear over here a member of Congress say, is the CIA going to wrap this up quick so we can get to the bazaar to buy rugs? I'm annoyed. And then this member asked, who had been on the committee for 5 years, asked, and this is 2008, by the way, and he says, why is Iran not supporting the Taliban in Afghanistan the way that the Iranians are supporting other groups in Iraq? Pretty crummy question, but at least he got all the people right, okay? So I start explaining the Sunni-Shia divide. And this member of Congress raises his hand, he goes, Will, what's the difference between a Sunni and a Shia? And I'm thinking he's getting ready to make a really inappropriate joke, and who am I to deny him this opportunity? My response was, I don't know, Congressman, what's the difference? And I'm getting ready to go, bum, right? His face goes bright red, didn't know that difference in Islam. Wow. Now, it's okay for my brother not to know that, right? Because my brother sells cable in San Antonio, Texas. But for a member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence to not know that difference when it comes to making decisions on the global war on terrorism, or when it comes to making decisions on how billions of hard-earned taxpayer dollars, it's unacceptable. And I can tell you story upon story like that. So I thought that these people were negating what my friends and I were doing. We were putting ourselves in harm's way, right, in order to protect our country, and I thought like they were eroding it. So I left Afghanistan, moved to San Antonio, ran for Congress, and lost an election by 700 votes. I don't tell that story anymore. But yeah, so that's why I ran. And so for me, it's being able to serve a cause that's larger than you. We are lucky to live in the United States of America, all right? And just like my mom said, you're either part of the problem or part of the solution. And so lace up your shoes and get involved and work on these issues. And that's why I love coming to places like here and meeting a lot of young folks that care about their country and are willing to step up and solve problems, because guess what? If y'all don't step up, nobody's going to, right? And that's why it's great. And I feel good, despite all the craziness we're going through right now, right? And it's a crazy time. I still believe our best days are ahead of us because of many of the young people in here that I've seen across this country. So I feel good about our future.
All right, in the last few minutes we have before we go to the Q&A, I want to ask you about impeachment.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with that story.
Yeah, what's
taking
that?
place in Washington.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So first I want to ask you where you stand on what we've learned so far about the president's phone call with the Ukrainian president.
Sure.
What does it do to, first of all, do you think it's inappropriate? Second of all, does it have any effect on U.S. foreign policy when you have a president of the United States asking for a favor to a foreign president, which is to investigate a local or a domestic political adversary?
So is it inappropriate? Yes. Would I have done it? Absolutely not. Does it have long-term implications on our foreign policy? 100%. Is it an impeachable issue? I don't know, and I don't think so. However, that's why we should investigate, right? The whistleblower came forward and identified a number of items that are troubling and should be reviewed. And that's why I support, going through and having hearings and making sure that we're turning over every rock and dotting every I. I think we should be protecting the whistleblower's identity. I think we should be doing everything we can, because this is a person that believes something was going wrong, and I want the oversight committees to be able to have access to that type of information, right? And so we should be investigating this. I want to see Rudy Giuliani in front of the Intelligence Committee and answer questions. We're having a number of State Department officials this week. I also believe the executive branch should be complying with subpoenas, right? Because Congress is a co-equal branch of government, and we should be doing this to understand what happened in the lead up into the conversation, right? Because that is where you're going to establish whether it was a bribe or not, right? And I'm of the opinion, impeachment, 535 people have different opinions on what impeachment is, right? 100 senators, 435 in the House. I believe it's a violation of the law, right? And to be able to prove that there was a violation of the law, that's why we got to make sure that we get to the root causes and interview all these people.
You said you wouldn't have made that phone call. You say it's inappropriate. If it's not a violation of law, is it an abuse of presidential power?
So the question is about whether it's impeachable or not, right? Is it a disagreement in policy, or is it a violation of the law, right? And that's where I look at it. The President Zelensky said he didn't feel like it was that he was being arm twisted or being pushed. We haven't heard from any of the State Department officials yet about whether their Ukrainian interlocutors felt that they were being twisted, and so we haven't gotten that perspective yet. And I would have thought if that would have happened, we would have heard that by now. But it does have long-term impact, right?
But there is space between a difference in policy and a violation of the law, right? There could be something that doesn't technically break the law, but is clearly an abuse of power. I'm wondering, you said that you believe that a phone call like this does have long-term consequences on U.S. foreign policy. How so?
If the content of that call, where the Ukrainian president gave his opinion on some other heads of state, is embarrassing. Right? This is, I think, there's the third time a presidential call has been leaked. The first 2 times were actual leaks. This time, the administration released it, right? So I think it's a little bit difference there. So that has a long-term impact. Look, I think what's happening in Syria is having a broad impact. Can you trust a Western coalition, right? Can you trust when somebody looks you in the eye and you have a senior military official saying, "I'm with you," right? Does that mean anything anymore? When you look at NAFTA, right? So there's a broader issue there of our allies, questioning our commitments. And one of the things that I've learned from my time in the CIA is be nice with nice guys and tough with tough guys, right? Not the other way around. And so that's the broader implication that this has. But let's also not be premature. Let's make sure that we understand everything that happened. Let's make sure we talk to the right folks. And so I believe the way the Senate is going forward on this investigation is a better way to do it than having everything. Like, I also believe in transparency, and everything should be revealed once it's done. But this is a serious issue, right? We are not voting somebody off the island on season 15 of Survivor. And so we should make sure that we are investigating this appropriately.
You know, I as a journalist, I talk to Republicans on Capitol Hill, and you said in public, almost all of them are still saying they're behind the president. Some have been more critical, like you, but most are not only saying this isn't impeachable, but proactively defending the president's behavior, saying there was nothing improper here. Behind closed doors, it's a little bit of a different tone sometimes. I've sensed at least a growing exhaustion or exasperation with this president's behavior. I wonder if you've sensed the same thing in general.
Well, I will say my frustration, right? The tweets, all these things, takes away from being able to talk about issues, right? Being able to talk about the economy, being able to talk about, look, I actually believe there's an opportunity with independents and some Democrats to take a conservative message. You can't do that if you're always having to talk about these types of issues. So it prevents us from being able to ultimately solve problems and talk about some of the victories that have happened, right? And that's frustrating. I also believe that it makes everybody, go to their corners, right? And I'm on the Intelligence Committee. I'm frustrated with Adam Schiff as well, right? And some of the ways he's handled this investigation. And that's why I point to my Republican and Democratic colleagues in the Senate on how they're moving forward with this particular issue. But it takes us away from being able to take a good message about the future to the electorate.
Just very briefly, you mentioned Syria. Why is this an issue, the president's decision to withdraw U.S. troops from northern Syria? Why is this an issue that we have seen a number of Republicans, especially those who are focused on national security like yourself, why is that the issue that we've seen finally prompt so much kind of dissension from the ranks?
Because people whose back we should have are going to get killed. I think it's that basic. When you look when you look at our folks in the intelligence community and the military that looked some of these Syrian Kurds in the eye and said, "We have your back. Help us in the coalition to defeat ISIS." And then you go around and say, "Sorry, y'all are getting ready to potentially get massacred," right? It is so visceral, and it has this long-term ramifications on our collective security, right? And our ability to build coalitions to deal with some of these challenges around the world. I think that's why it's such a visceral issue, and you're seeing what it feels like, more people speaking out.
All right, I want to make sure we have time for the Q&A now. Anyone who has questions, feel free to come forward, and especially remind everyone that the first 3 questions, if we could get from students, that would be great.
I'll say we solved it all.
We talked about everything. We're good.
Can you tell me your name and what program you're in?
Sure. My name is Rahul Subramanian, and I'm a grad student in the Biological Sciences Division.
Oh, cool.
So thank you for your talk. I wanted to follow up a little bit on the current situation in Syria. You mentioned just now that you view Congress as a co-equal branch of government, and that it's important that Congress be informed about U.S. foreign policy. Given for members of Congress who disagree with current U.S. policy, the recent developments in Syria, are there any concrete actions that members of Congress can take using their power of the purse, or are they limited to merely expressing their disagreement verbally?
There are 3 pieces of legislation that are probably going to get dropped tomorrow, and they're all sanctioned bills against Turkey. The only tool of appropriations that we have would be to restrict funds from the executive branch to do something, but compelling them, you can restrict someone from doing something, but compelling them to actually change a behavior is incredibly difficult using the power of the purse. So let's address Turkey. There is a bill, and all 3 of these bills are bipartisan, and those are probably being dropped tomorrow, and I'm a co-sponsor of all of them.
Hey, thank you for being here.
Sure.
I'm a second-year student at Harris from Winsboro, Texas.
Okay, right on. Where is that?
Hour north of Tyler.
Okay, right on. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So Marshall, right?
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
really right on the corner. Yeah.
So my question, you spoke of rebuilding the Republican Party and having the Republican Party change to reflect the United States. My question for you is, do you think that the Republican Party, is there a policy area or issue that they should either kind of let go of or like change their message, do you think, to make it more accessible to allow that change to happen within the party?
Look, I think on all the phobias, right? Like, stop it, right? Look, also immigration. DACA, Dreamers, 1.2 million kids that have, young people, I shouldn't say kids, excuse me. 1.2 million young people that have only known the United States of America as their home. They're already contributing to our society. They're already contributing to our economy. These young people are already Americans. Let's make it formal, right? This is something that should be solved, and these are a group of people that we should be embracing. And that is one that I think is a big deal. But what the reality is, there's actually more Republicans than most people think that are supportive of things that I've outlined. I can get into a long treaty about how I know that, because I have the only truly bipartisan immigration bill in the House. Actually, there was a vote on it in the Senate as well, too. But look, we are a country of immigrants. We benefit from immigration. I was telling people earlier, you know how you deal with China? China is stealing our stuff. There's no question about it. China has been taking advantage of international laws. But if they're going to continue to steal our technology, let's steal their engineers, right? If you're going to be if you're an artificial intelligence programmer or a quantum computing programmer, come. We're going to get your parents' visas. We're going to get your grandparents' visas if that's necessary, right? Let's bring folks like that here. So immigration, I think, is so critical to our future. This is where we need to make sure it's changed.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Congressman. My name is Vishan. I'm first year in the college. My question is about impeachment. So as far as I understand it, I appreciate that your standard is whether the president broke the law or not. But as far as I understand what your standard for that is, it's like if the Ukrainian president or if some of his envoys said that they felt pressured by the United States in order to set up a meeting with the president or whatever. Given how our javelins and our other weapon systems to Ukraine are like their lifeblood, and the U.S. is kind of their guardian angel, I find it difficult to see a scenario in which a Ukrainian president does say like, I felt pressured by the person that's helped my country survive. Short of that statement, is there a scenario in which you believe the president broke the law, even if the Ukrainian president doesn't say that?
Well, we have to see the evidence that there was a violation of the law, right? I think that's why we have the investigations and that's why we have the hearings. The javelins were separate in addition to the other question we're trying to get to the bottom of is the funds that Congress already passed to go to Ukraine, right? I was one of the co-sponsors of that legislation. That didn't include the javelins. The javelins was in addition to. I think we should be selling javelins to the Ukrainians. One of my problems with this broader question is the topic, when we talk about Ukraine, we should be talking about how are we going to get the Russians from leaving Ukraine rather than talking about this particular issue. So again, the investigations is to understand and uncover whether there was a violation of the law and what happened. And it'd be premature for me to speak on it because I haven't seen all the information.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for
Sure,
being
of
here.
course.
My name is Indy, and I'm a second year in the college.
Cool.
I'm majoring in environmental science,
Right on.
so climate change is definitely an issue.
It's real,
Yeah.
it's real, it's happening.
So-
Man is having an impact on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
Thank you.
yeah.
Believe it or not, that's actually news that a Republican congressman just said that.
So my question was, I mean, obviously climate change is an issue
Sure.
that we want everybody to be involved in, but it seems to be something that's sort of talked about on increasingly divided lines.
Yeah, of course.
And you spoke a lot about sort of envisioning the future of the Republican Party, so I wanted to ask how you thought there might be a more bipartisan approach
Sure,
to the issue
sure.
of climate change.
Sure, look, I appreciate the question. And so I was in France last week, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. I swear this is not the beginning of a joke. And we were there to support the Global Fund. The Global Fund was created in 2002 by, it was supported in the creation by George W. Bush, Jacques Chirac, Tony Blair, and Kofi Annan. And the idea was there needed to be an entity to help drive the entire world's support to getting rid of AIDS, TB, and malaria, right? And in 2002, look, I remember in 95 and 96, the AIDS epidemic and what everybody thought where that was going. Since the Global Fund was created, 32 million lives have been saved, right? That's amazing. Nobody in the world should be dying of a preventable disease, right? And so why do I tell this story? The 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats were there to show the rest of the world in a bipartisan, bicameral way, the United States of America is going to invest $4.68 billion in this next phase of this initiative. And when you look at what we've been able to do against TB, malaria, and AIDS, we can be on path to getting rid and preventing further infections by 2030, right? That's a big deal. We're on the path to solve that problem, so we can tackle tough problems like climate change. I'm the co-chair of the National Parks Caucus. A number of scientific entities have said that conservation can address a third of the issue of making sure that we stay within the 2%, 2 degrees Celsius change by 2030. Right? A third of that is conservation alone, right? So making sure that we're protecting our parks, making sure we're growing them, right? These are things that we can do. Carbon capture, this new technologies along those lines, right? And the Republican Party has to provide something more than just being against the Green New Deal, right? And there are some really thoughtful people on the Republican side that's talking about this. And there is more people. It's unfortunate that the perception is when a Republican says climate change is real, that's news, right? It's unfortunate, but there are several Republicans that believe that way, and we just restarted, it's called the Roosevelt Conservation Caucus. It's Republicans in the House and the Senate to address this. So I think Bill Gates has identified a number of initiatives and areas that I think there can be bipartisan support. I'm a technologist, so when you look at those kinds of things that we can be doing, and again, conservation is important. So those are things that we can be going. And what's great is I've met a lot of young Republicans and college Republicans. This is actually a number one issue for them. So again, as the Republican Party ages, we're going to see some people that understand that we got to solve this problem. Because guess what? Nature is not a destination; it's our home. And we should be taking care of it properly.
Thank you so much.
I'm an alum, Robert Bornholz. The Mueller report cites instances of Trump trying to coerce people to back stories that aren't true. The Ukraine phone call sounds like Trump is trying to pressure the Ukraine president to back the story that CrowdStrike framed Russia for hacking the DNC. Now that story, because it would reverse the attribution of the hacking on Russia, would be a predicate for waiving or ending sanctions on Russia. So the very intent behind that effort could be taken as a kind of evidence of criminal intent. But short of that, Republicans who unconditionally back Trump and like wave away all of these possibilities may be so disgracing themselves, but conversely, coming out against Trump could be a way of bringing a different kind of a reconstructing the Republican Party.
Sure. The CrowdStrike issue, that I'm pretty sure has been debunked as like, crazy Facebook ideas. Not Facebook, but on Facebook, I should be clear.
Conspiracy theories circulated on Facebook.
Yeah, thank you. But that's not what sanctions on Russia are predicated on. Sanctions on Russia are predicated on their invasion in the Donbass, eastern Ukraine, and Crimea. There were additional sanctions put on because they got involved in, because they were trying to influence our elections, obviously. And there's a notion out there that Russia did not try to mess with our election. That's a bipartisan agreement, right? The Russian government in 2016 tried to influence our election. They tried to erode trust in our democratic institutions. I was advocating for Ambassador Kislyak, the Russian ambassador, to be kicked out of the country before the end of the 2016 elections. I held the first hearings on disinformation and the Russians being involved in our elections before the 2016 elections were over. And unfortunately, when Bob Mueller, who's a great American who has served his country, was in front of our committee, I asked him, was this a one-time event? He said, no, it's happening right now, still. We have to make sure that we're dealing with this, and a number of steps have been taken to harden our election infrastructure. But disinformation, we were talking about this earlier, how do you counter disinformation? That's a trickier issue, and we have to have government, private sector, media, academia involved in addressing that problem.
My name's Dave Dalka. I'm an alum of the business school, master's degree.
Right on.
Want to ask you a yes or no question. With the divisive environment in Washington today, Main Street issues are being lost. One of these issues is the high actual unemployment rate, which is comprised of the fake unemployment rate that the BLS puts out every month, along with the people that have been unemployed 6 months or more that they don't count. And now in the gig economy, people take a gig, they fall off, they never paid the unemployment pool, they can't file, so they don't get counted either. The true unemployment rate for working age people in this country today is actually 21.2%. If I was to share this data with you, I'm something called Revive the Middle. If I was to share this data with you in your remaining time in Congress, would you sponsor a bill to demand that the BLS put out accurate information so that we stop giving foreign outsourcers a tool to destroy white-collar jobs in this country?
Well, I also don't answer yes or no questions because that's not a yes or no question. I'd love to see the data, right? Because how we take care of people, right, that are left out is how your system is going to be defined, right? And so I'd love to see the data, and if you have suggestions on ways you can address that, then I'm always interested in trying to get to the truth, right? I'm a professional intelligence officer and a classically trained engineer. Facts matter. And having access to them is important. So I would love to, if you have it with you or a card, please let me know.
Hello, my name is Adam, Harris Public Policy class of 2021. I'm Crimean Tatar from Crimea, Ukraine. And my question is to you as an expert in intelligence, first of all. So in 2014, Russia occupied Crimea, made a military invasion. And we today constantly hear from US officials in Ukraine and all over the world that United States had information, but it was not enough to understand that Russia will make this step and cross the red line and attack Ukraine. My question is that United States has a military bases in Turkey and all around in Europe. But is it possible that before invasion, the thousands of portable radio stations of soldiers were activated? The system in the tanks, the system on avia forces were activated. It's easy to locate even with the civilian electronics. Whether it's real that the United States did not have enough power to detect this, or the analysis were wrong, or some people, weak people, stand behind this decision of not stopping this. So,
look, if you go back to 2014, you have to go back a little bit further, because I can make an argument that not adhering to the red line within Syria and Bashar al-Assad, a use of chemical weapons back in 2014, showed the Russians that there was not going to be a response to the crossing of a red line. Days later is when the Russians ultimately invaded Ukraine. And whether there was intelligence or not that predicted that was going to happen, were we going to be prepared in order to thwart that or to try to push them back, right? Were we in a position to show the Russians that don't invade Ukraine? I would love to have Ukraine be a member of NATO, right? I would love to see a country like Georgia, right, be a member of NATO. I think Turkey, hello, we need to question buy-in. You know, NATO is designed to be a alliance against Russia, and you're buying military equipment from Russia, right? Like, maybe that we should rethink Turkey's role in the alliance as well. And so whether or not the intelligence was there to predict that, did we create an environment to make the Russians think again about making that move? And did we have the opportunity to counter that, right? And that's what was lacking back in 2014. And then the question is now, how are we putting together an international coalition to get the Russians to leave eastern Ukraine and Crimea? And this is why when the president and Vladimir Putin were together in Helsinki, this was what, 6 months ago, 9 months ago, a year ago? I don't remember. I put out I was pretty disgusted, because I felt like I never would have thought that a US president would have been played by Russian intelligence. And standing next to Vladimir Putin, when Vladimir Putin acted like Ukraine was part of the problem, and the US president didn't say anything in response, to me, that was the best kind of covert action that the Russians could ever do, because it's not Ukraine's fault. The Russians invaded, plain and simple. And so we need to rebuild a international coalition to try to get them out. And the Russians are using eastern Ukraine to perfect all their electronic warfare technology, and they're taking those learnings and exporting that to other parts of the world. If Turkey goes into northern Syria, guess what's going to also follow? You're going to see Russian military equipment as well. And then do I always say, do the Turks turn left, technically go east, right, into northern Iraq and impact the Iraqi Kurds, right, who have literally been our longest and most reliable ally in that region. These are all the questions, and by this decision, Russia is winning, Iran is winning, and we need to be rethinking our relationship with Turkey. Sorry for a long-winded answer, but it's important, and thanks for bringing it up.
Thank you so much.
So we've got about 9 minutes left, so let's just get through the questions of the people online now. And
Sure.
Hi, Congressman. My name is Rohit. I'm a first-year MPP. So my question is, you had mentioned earlier the 2012 autopsy report, and yet we see, President Trump's tweets and all this stuff. And I was wondering if you could touch on why you think there's this huge gap strategy-wise between the reasoning and forethought in that report, and then Reince Priebus, who wrote the report, serving as President Trump's staff. And then the second part of that question is do you think this is going to have a long-lasting effect on the Republican Party, or do you think it's eventually going to disappear from the consciousness of the electorate?
If I knew the answer to your first question, why there's a disconnect from the autopsy to where we are now, if I knew the answer, there wouldn't be a disconnect, right? Because, and the short answer is, I actually don't know, right? And ultimately, people are making decisions that you talk to a smaller group of voters to drive out that base versus trying to appeal to a broad audience, right? I've always had to appeal to a broad audience. Look, in those primaries that are decided in the elections that are decided in primaries, you have maybe 35, 40,000, 50,000 people making a decision. When the decision is made in November, it's 300,000, it's 400,000, right? It's a different thing. Is it going to have long-term impacts on the party? Absolutely, right? And it's making it harder for us to appeal to the larger growing groups of voters. And I said it earlier, and I'm saying it again. If the Republican Party doesn't start looking like America, there's not going to be a Republican Party in America. And this not only should Republicans care, but independents and Democrats should care, because we have to have two strong parties. That's our system. Whether a two-party system is right or not has been debated since the beginning of our governments, right? It's what we have. Let's deal with what we have, and let's make sure we have two strong parties.
Good evening.
Hello.
Drawing on your experience as a CIA agent, how would you deal with a government like the government in Honduras, which is friendly but bends to the will of the United States, yet every level of the government, executive, judicial, legislative, is corrupted by narcotics trafficking? Now, would the key be ending impunity or shaming the people that use cocaine in the United States so Honduras isn't a transit point? I'm bringing this up because I used to work there and my wife's from there.
Yeah. Well, look, so not just Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, the Northern Triangle is important because it's violence, lack of economic opportunity, and extreme poverty in those regions that are driving the migration trends here to the United States. That's putting unbelievable pressure on our borders. I think what we need to be doing in this region is I think we should have a special representative for the Northern Triangle, which is a senior diplomat to coordinate all of government response to those areas. And we should be developing a Marshall Plan for that region. But it starts with the reason you have violence and lack of economic opportunity is generally because of political corruption and allowing that stuff to happen. Now, we've seen programs, aid programs, State Department programs, where they've addressed the police. The reason you have people leaving some of these areas is because they can't trust the police. So State Department aid went in, fired all the police, rehired people, taught them how to do community policing, right, which is what we do here in the United States of America. Oh, and what happened? We saw violence decrease. What else happened? We saw, there's less people leaving those areas to try to immigrate somewhere like to the United States. And your point about the use of drugs, right? It's the narcotraficantes in the United States of America are making roughly, it's a conservative estimate, $40 billion, right? That's the market cap of Starbucks is like 32 billion. McDonald's is like 36 billion. So they're making more money than all the lattes that are sold in the United States, and we're sending that down there, and that's fueling this. That's fueling the corruption. And so I always say President Monroe would be rolling around in his grave right now, knowing that we haven't taken an interest in our own hemisphere. But it's not just for the United States to solve. This is an issue that the International Development Bank should be involved. Where is the Organization of American States? This has to be a coalition of Western Hemisphere entities to try to solve it, because it does have long-term impacts here. Oh, and by the way, we shouldn't be restricting aid to those countries. We should be going over it with a fine-tooth comb, going over it with a white glove, because of the corruption issues that you've talked about. But it's a fraction of the cost to solve the problem there before it gets to our shores.
Sorry.
Hi, my name is David Villegas, so I guess I have two parts to this question, and since I'm the last question, I guess we'll have a positive question. So, the first part is like, how well and still is your relationship with the other Texas congressmen, like in the 15th district as well as the 34th district? And the second part was, I've heard in biography in the beginning that you went to Mexico City and impressed. How impressive was that? And because I actually say those questions because I have a sister who married someone and she's living in McAllen, Texas, as well as like much of my relatives live within Mexico City.
15, is that Philemon?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. One of the things that was shocking to me when I first got into Congress is how warm relations are actually between individual members, right? But it's when the TVs turn on that everybody's like, starts elbowing. I was on Meet the Press or one of these things. It was 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and we're in the green room, and everybody's laughing. We're going to work on this together. We're going to work on this together. And this was my first time, and I'm like, wow, oh my God. And then we get out onto the set, and it was like everybody's tearing their eyes out. And if you go back and look at it, I'm kind of sitting there like, what just happened? But those relations are actually warm, and so there's a foundation to try to ultimately get things done. Mexico City, it's one of my favorite places. And it was something that inspired me. I can draw a line to where I am today because of that experience. And it's even more important to me because of the impact that it had. And I'm going to use our final minute and 42 seconds to tell a story that's related. I was in Pakistan in 2005 when there was an earthquake in Muzaffarabad. It's the capital of Azad Kashmir. Killed 80,000 people, the earthquake. 7.6 on the Richter scale. At the time, Ryan Crocker was the ambassador, the best thing the State Department has ever produced since George C. Marshall. He wanted to know, because this was so impactful and so devastating, we weren't getting good reports on what the Pakistani government needed. And so he went to my boss and said, get a group up there. My boss came to me and said, hey, Hurd, lead a team up to Azad Kashmir to figure out what the Pakistani people needed. And very quickly, we learned they needed airlift, right? And so I report back to the ambassador. We get 22 Chinook helicopters up there, and we're directing traffic. I'd been there for about 5 days. I was going to jump on one of these helicopters, go back to Islamabad, and we get a report that this village, about 250 people, had been without food, water, power for 4 or 5 days. And it was negative 20 degrees below zero at night, by the way, middle of winter. So we decided we were going to stop, pick them all up, take them to Islamabad. So we're on this helicopter, it lands, the big bay doors open, and all these villagers start piling into the helicopter. And if you've ever seen a helicopter crew before, they look like they're from outer space, right? Black masks, the flight jackets, hoses connected everywhere. And there was this little girl, this village elder held this little girl who was about 6 or 7 years old, who lost both her mother and father in the earthquake. She sees this scene and she's screaming, she's scared, she's nervous. And this village elder hands the little girl to me. And so I'm holding on to this little girl as tight as I can. And we take off, and about halfway through the trip, she relaxes and lays her head on my shoulder. And we land in Islamabad, bay doors open, everybody starts piling out. I put the little girl down. She takes about 10 steps, turns around, comes back, gives me the biggest hug I've ever gotten in my life. She goes over to the helicopter crewman, who she probably thought was from outer space, and kisses him on the hand. And he pats her on the head, gives her a thumbs up and smiles, and she returns the smile and the gesture, and then she runs away, right? That little girl's face is seared into my brain, because what we did on that day was an example of how the US government is the only government in the world that has the resources and the willingness to help people even if they're 7,000 miles away, right? And we do that because we know, and many people in the government remember, that treat your neighbors the way you would want to be treated, right? And if we did that a little bit more, not only in foreign policy, but in our day-to-day activities, I think we would see a change. And I'm excited because I know there's a lot of people here that are part of these programs that care about not only your community, but the rest of the world. And you are going to love thy neighbor like thyself. So thanks for allowing me to be here. Thanks for coming out on a Monday night. And God bless you all.
Thanks for doing that.